Hello, bonjour, everybody. My name is Eric Chapuis, Business Advisor here at the World Trade Centre Winnipeg. I would like to begin today's webinar with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the lands in Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Innu, Denisilune, and Dakota Oyate nations, and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. The World Trade Centre Winnipeg team respects the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledges the harms and mistakes of the past and present throughout our nations. Thank you for joining our webinar, Accessibility in Web Design and Social Media, which will be presented by Susan Brunn and Deborah Fair from Relish Ideas. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. Please send all your webinar questions directly to the chat box at the top of your screen, and Susan and Deborah will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of their presentation. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box, and I will answer your question as soon as possible. You will also receive a PDF copy and recording of this presentation within the next week. Okay. So let's kick off this webinar. I would like to introduce you to Susan Brunn and Deborah Fair. Susan is an entrepreneur and founder at Relish Branding, transformed her small design boutique to a thriving agency of over 20 employees over the past 25 years. In 2017, she led Relish to become a certified B Corporation, aligning profit with social and environmental impact. Driven by her passion for people and projects, she has extensive experience in technology development and commercialization, is co-founder of Quipped Interactive Learning Tools, and serves as fractional CMO for Illumia Labs. Deborah is the Communication Director for Relish Branding and has over 23 years of industry experience in the industry. With a passion for a one-to-one marketing philosophy combined with data analysis, psychographics, and change management, Deborah has broadened audience, heightened engagement, and brought success to the organization she works with, which include Folklorama, Winnipeg Art Gallery, Manitoba Museum, and the MS Society. Having led communication for the Manitoba government, Protect Manitoba, response to the pandemic, and rated for a variety of government websites, she is adept at transactional and plain language approaches to communication. Warm welcome to Susan and Deborah. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. We're really glad to be here with everyone today. Again, I'm Suzanne Brown. I'm the Principal and Managing Director at Relish. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a dive into accessibility and web design, which I'll present, and then Deborah will talk about some communications and social media insights. All right. So Relish is a 25-year-old business. We started in 1998, so I think we're kind of heading into 26 years. So foundationally, we've always believed in when business does good, it's good for business. So we've always strived to empower people and organizations to solve complex challenges and create positive change through our strategic practices in design, marketing, technology, and innovation. In 2017, we became a certified B Corporation, so we continually verify on social and environmental performance. And this particular topic of accessibility is definitely has been one of our priorities over the past couple of years. We've completed a number of accessibility projects. We, in 2023, launched the Manitoba Accessibility Office website, which is a AAA, WCAG AAA standard. We'll talk a little bit about more of that in the presentation. We also have done several websites for other organizations in the community, nonprofit and government organizations like the Teachers Retirement Allowance Fund and Saint Amand. So not only in web development, but also in design practice, communications, and even optimizing PDFs. So with that, we just wanted to take a quick survey on everyone's understanding of accessibility at what level you were at. So I will. All right, thank you, everyone. So we have a number of people that are not sure what it means or developing or learning a thing or two. And then it's great. We have someone that's advanced, so maybe we can learn from you at the end of the presentation as well. So thanks, everyone. So a little bit of an overview. So today we're going to discuss like who benefits from accessible practices. We'll talk about the Manitoba accessible standards and contextualize those a little bit. The WCAG guidelines, accessible design, social media and communication. And then at the end, we'll give you some additional tips and ideas. So who benefits? So accessibility matters to everyone. So it's not just people with disabilities, those being like blind or visually impaired, deaf or hard of hearing, those with cognitive, motor, physical, neurological or other disabilities, those with visible or invisible, permanent or temporary disabilities. But it also applies to like busy people. So people do prefer accessible content for quick and efficient consumption. We have so much content, so many messages streaming our way. People just want to feel accessible, friendly, easy to consume content. And social media users love accessible content too. It ensures that everyone can engage. So ultimately, it's the ease of understanding and engagement. So it's for people of all ages and all abilities. It's inclusivity, safe, and equality. It creates a more inclusive, safe, and equal environment for everybody. So Deborah found this really interesting example of accessibility called the curb cut effect. So when we think about accessibility and we put it first, everyone essentially benefits. So this was an example of a curb cut effect that actually was done for people with disabilities, but everyone benefits, whether it's a baby stroller or a bike. Thinking and designing accessible benefits like everyone in our community, and this is an excellent example. So accessibility is not a feature. We consider it a social trend. It's not just a matter of, I must follow the law. When you know better, you do better. And it's seen as an opportunity, we will provide better service and value for everyone. So we'll talk about the Manitoba Accessible Guidelines. So there's 5 areas that have been addressed in the guidelines, and those are customer service, employment standards, transportation, public spaces, and what we'll be discussing today is accessible information and communication standard regulation. So this builds on existing requirements of Manitoba Human Rights Code. It identifies, reduces, and removes barriers for website users and adopts globally recognized web content accessibility guidelines as a minimum requirement. This was enacted in May 1st of 2022. It considers the way in which people interact with or access to information, including digital. It requires measures, policies, and practices, and to provide barrier-free information and communication. So the requirement is that all business and nonprofit organizations must comply by May 1st of next year. So there are 3 levels of accessibility that we look at. So a level A is basic accessibility requirements, like having alt tags for images, which we'll talk about a little bit. Level A is more advanced. It ensures content is accessible to a wider range of people. It includes things like proper color contrast. And this is the current benchmark that we're experiencing in Manitoba. And level AAA is the highest level. It covers the most extensive accessibility features like sign language for videos. We can also think of a level A as providing an equal and same experience for all users, where a AA might have modifications for those that have disabilities. A AAA provides the same experience for all types of users. So the requirements include that web apps meet WCAG 2.1 level AA. Web content must meet that criteria as well. Accessible formats of information. You must provide instruction on how to request accessible formats, especially related to emergency and public safety, or provide PDFs in accessible formats that screen readers can access. You must offer consultations upon respect to remove barriers to accessibility in a timely manner at no or equal cost. Document requests, efforts, actions, and progress to increase accessibility and provide this information upon request. And also provide training for staff and supporting documentation. The exceptions are if it's not technically feasible, if the technology is not available, undue hardship, lack of control over a content repository, content relates to product labels or product information beyond your control. Exceptions do not apply to educational institutions. But additionally, business and nonprofits have some additional exemptions and redemptions that you can read about online. The best tools for access are the Manitoba Accessibility Office for businesses, nonprofit, and public sectors. And we wanted to make a note that there have been grants that are available of $50,000 maximum for project-based funds to help municipality, nonprofits, and businesses that you can apply through this portal. I believe the portal is closed for this term, and hopefully they'll be reopening it up closer to fall for a few more granting periods. There's also the Canadian Accessibility Act, organizations under federal responsibility, those being Crown Corps, banks, airlines, railroad, and transportations, can look for information at that website. Now we'll talk about web content accessibility guidelines specifically. So web application requirements according to regulation are it must be perceivable, so visible to the senses, being sight, sound, and touch. It must be operable, easy to interact with, navigable entirely by a keyboard, and needs to support sight-assisted navigation and other alternatives to a classic mouse. Understandable, so the information must be clear and informative, devoid of unnecessary technical terms or complex jargon, so writing in plain language. And it must be robust, working well with as technology evolves, compatible with assistive technology tools such as screen reader technology. So if your organization is launching or significantly updating its website, or if their website is used to access the organization's goods and services, you must at a minimum meet that WCAG 2.1 level A level by May of next year. These standards address a wide range of disabilities, including visual, auditory, physical speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological disabilities, but they also enhance usability for older people with changing abilities due to aging. Note that 2.1 level AA will not cover all people with all degrees and combinations of disability, but it's the benchmark that we're using now. So we just wanted to show you an example of what a screen reader is. So on the right, you can see how the screen reader is attached to a keyboard and different features are accessed by the user. So it enables users with visual impairments to essentially use that computer. So it uses text-to-speech engine to translate on-screen information into speech, which can be heard through earphones or speakers or be produced into Braille. When we look at websites, you can correlate that with an accessible assistant. So in this image here, you can see that usually that little accessible icon that you see often in the corner of websites will launch a preset of accessible features for those that are using keyboard assistant. So non-text requirements for level A, so these are things that aren't textual, but features within a website. User fields must have names and descriptions, so name, phone number. So when we're talking about user fields, we're talking about like form fields. Any kind of tests or exercises must also provide descriptive text for non-text content. For non-text content intended to create a sensory experience, you must provide descriptive text alternatives. For Ketchupa, offer alternative forms using different sensory outputs. So those are the forms that you add that to catch spams on forms. Those are often like the 9 little pictures where you have to find the motorbikes or the traffic lights. decorative, formative, invisible content, non-text content that is purely decorative, used for visual formatting or not presented to users should be implemented to be ignored by assistive technology. So those are kind of like design embellishments that don't really offer anything to the experience for the user. Pre-recorded and audio video must provide a text version separately from the captions. Captions must be open or always visible, or closed captions that are available with a click. And sound effects could be used, including descriptive captions for those. Flexible presentation, so the content that can be presented in different ways without losing information or structure. Visual content ensures the relationship of objects, charts, and other visual content is clear. We'll talk a little bit more of that in design. And providing written description or tags for all objects. So those are even things like photos. So on the right, I've just showed you like a lot of content management systems now have the availability for you to put in tags or alternative text. So you'll find a lot of those features when you upload an image, there'll be a little box that invites you to apply that descriptive text to it. So it's become much more intuitive to do this type of work. At a level AA for non-text adaptable content, content must be viewed in an orientation unless a specific orientation is crucial to its meaning. Data entry boxes serve as clear purpose, and it must be technology supported. So content is created using technologies that understand form input data. And what does that look like at a AAA level? It's adding sign language interpretation and other extended audio descriptions to convey the sense of visuals for all levels. When we look at non-text distinguishable content, color alone should not determine an action. And an audio or video longer than 30 seconds includes pause, stop, and volume controls. At a AA level, text and images of text against the background must have a content ratio of 4.5 to 1. Line height is 1.5 times the font size. Space after paragraphs is 2 times the font size. Letter spacing is 0.2 times the font size, and text should be able to be resized up to about 200%. And text must be used to convey information rather than images of text if technologies allow achieving a visual presentation. So there's a real focus at that AA level for greater contrast in design, larger font sizes, much more space, a lot more white space in presentation. At an understandable, readable content level A, the computer should be able to figure out the main language of each web page. At a AA level, the computer programs can figure out the language of each part of the content, except for the names, technical terms, uncertain words, and phrases closely linked to the surrounding text language. So we provided you a little bit of tips, like a really good web developer will be able to sort of do an audit of your website. So this isn't something that you need to do alone, but it's really good to have a baseline understanding because creating an accessible website at a AA level is more than just having an accessible icon on the corner. There's some tests that you can do yourself to check your website. So in that case, knowledge is power. So you know that you're paying for your site to be optimized and you're getting what you paid for. So at a basic level, without being a developer, you can try navigating through the website using only the tab, enter keys, and arrow keys, making sure you can access all the links and buttons without using a mouse. You should be able to adjust the browser's text size settings if you see your browser menu or settings to make sure the text remains readable and doesn't overlap or disappear. And you can check if the text and background colors have enough contrast by simply squinting your eyes. There's some really good tools I'm going to show you as well that you can use. If you can't clearly see the text, though, the contrast may be too low. All text for images, so you can see that those have been done by hovering your mouse over images to see if any descriptions pop up. So if not, it may mean that images lack alternative text, which is important for screen readers to use as we discussed. Make sure links and buttons are descriptive and easy to understand. So we want to avoid language like click here or read more as linked text, and Deborah will explain that further in our presentation. You want to test out your forms to ensure that fields have a clear label, and check if error messages are descriptive and easy to understand, so written in plain language. And then you want to check that your videos have captions or subtitles available. And if not, it's going to be difficult for those who are deaf or hard of hearing to understand that content. So those are some really good takeaways for what you can do yourself. But again, a really good web developer will be able to help you audit your website and provide a report on how it should be optimized. Few more tips. Scan the page visually and see if the content flows logically from top to bottom. This ensures that screen reader users can understand the content in the correct order. Use the browser's zoom feature to enlarge the page to see if all the content remains visible and usable. And finally, submit forms with incorrect or incomplete information to check if the error messages are displayed clearly and suggest how to fix an issue. There's some really good testing tools available. In the presentation, we'll ensure that we have links to them. User accessibility testing and browser tool accession are aplenty. These will help you identify and fix accessible issues. So those are tools like Wave that you can see a sample on the right side, but also Axe and Lighthouse are tools that are commonly used and create really good reports from you. So one of the things that you should keep in mind if you end up converting your site to a WCAG 2.1 AA level, that you're going to want to do a little bit of reading and accessibility check on your site to maintain the accessibility, particularly with those websites with content management systems. So just going to talk a little bit about accessible design. So again, we talked a bit about in website, the standards are to maintain a high contrast between text background colors to improve readability. Again, there's some great online tools, as you can see on the right, that kind of provide guidelines of what poor and good contrast is. You want to avoid using color combinations that may be difficult for people with color blindness, and test color combination, again, using those online tools for accessibility. You want to avoid sharing information solely through color. So that can even be links as well, because people that are colorblind may not, or blind may not be able to see those. You want to use additional visual cues, and those can be icons or text labels to ensure those who are colorblind can access those. And links should be clearly visible by underlining. It should always be in addition to color. You want to use a readable font to ensure text is large enough to be easily read, especially for users with low vision. So again, bigger fonts are better. Avoid smaller, thin fonts that may be difficult to read. And charts and graphs should have distinct colors and patterns to differentiate. So if you look at the chart on the right, if it was just made out of colors and I'm colorblind, I couldn't really distinguish one bar or one point of the legend over the other. So usually applying patterns to that help that charts and graphs be more accessible to all users. And finally, you want to provide alternative text or descriptions for non-text elements for screen readers.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. So we're going to talk a bit about social media and communications. Next screen. So in our approach to social media, we want to be thinking about the language we're using. That's plain language. We want to take into consideration some of the design elements that Suzanne talked about. And we also want to use hashtags, of course, and emojis. Screen readers automatically code for those, so you don't actually have to write them out in any alt text. Again, don't use the click here language, and try to provide context to links that differentiate between whether it's a PDF or an external web link. And we don't use underline except when many social media, you can't even do some formatting like that. We don't use underline except in web links. So the accessibility sort of icons checklists, actually go back for a second. That sort of this whole list is kind of a nice icon to, sorry, go back one screen.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, good. So the icons, it's kind of, I love this little icon that Suzanne found. It's sort of a nice reminder to just even like print it out and put it on your screen as a reminder that, are you using plain language? Camel case hashtags and also website URLs. When you're writing it out, if you use the caps as well as the lowercase, it's a lot easier to read your hashtags rather than doing all lowercase. Websites and social media, they can all read camel case hashtags, so I would use that. And to think about your image descriptions, have you done either kind of your description in your post or an alt tag? And then think about your captioning and audio and your link shorteners, your bit.lys, or however you're shortening your links. So that's a great little reminder to keep on your screen. So in making images accessible, the descriptions for images that are provided in one part of your data entry field, it's not going to be read by the screen readers. So we do recommend that you use alt tags, which are specifically going to be accessible by the screen readers. But it sort of depends on who your audience is. Image descriptions are great. And you can still include those. It reaches a lot of eyeballs, but the alt tags is really where the screen readers are going to be picking up copy and where folks are used to finding the image descriptions. When you right click on an image, you can select all the size and positions and the formatting, and then the alt text tab should be available to you in most web browsers and on your social media. One thing that's come up recently is the discussion around diversity descriptors in alt tags. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And that can be sort of your cultural, ethnic, or gender identity tags. And so we want to think about what your mission is, what kind of organization you are. If you're an advocacy organization for LGBTQ, you would want to be thoughtful about how you write up your tags, but you need to have your credibility and authenticity as an organization to be able to create the tags that make sense for your organization and understand what your goals are in your social media and communications. So writing an alt tag, we want to make sure that we're communicating the context and the emotions that a person's going to experience when they see the image that's provided. So we want to be able to say, you know, is the point of the image that they're joyful and that they're experiencing something in a particular way? What is the context of the image and who is the audience that you're speaking to? In your alt tag, you don't need to write in it's an image of or a photo of, because the screen readers will already indicate that in the outputs. You want to focus on the main ideas being conveyed by the, so if you have a really complex image and lots of things are going on, you don't need to provide a description of everything in the image, just what is the main point being conveyed. And some images, if they don't have any particular meaning, but they're there as an embellishment, you don't have to describe those. Emojis are read automatically in alt codes, and the character limits are set on alt tags, so they can't be too long. It can be really disruptive if you find an image description that goes on and on. You wonder, is the point the image or is the point the post that came along with the image? And often you want to make sure that in your post accompanying the image that you've got, like, the intention of the image should be written up in your post as well. And sometimes it's appropriate, it may be appropriate to provide image descriptions for non-screen readers, especially if your post relates to a relevant disability. So depending on what organization you are with, or if you're doing a post for a particular group of people who may have some disability, you might want to do an image description that relates to that that particular post. It might not be in all of your posts, but some of them might be more relevant than others. So here is a woman optimizing WordPress website for SEO. So if you're an organization and you're really focused on WordPress or search engine optimization, that might be your tagline. But if you're maybe just, a different kind of organization, women researching free blogging platforms, both of those are valid tags depending on what the topic is of the web page. So this next one here we have, the same image for two different options. So if you're an organization that's advocating for diverse women in some field, you might want to have an alt tag that actually says female Asian student in graduation cap gown smiling. But if you're an organization that's just selling student loans and it doesn't really matter, you might have female graduate aspirationally gazing to the future. So we want to create emotions, because that's what a lot of images are trying to do. They're trying to evoke emotion and connection. So your alt tag should have those emotive words in there. But the amount of description that you provide in terms of the diverse labeling, that's still an area that I think people are still kind of thinking about how to do it well and thoughtfully. So that's one option. Captions provide a text version of spoken words. So open captions are always on and closed captions can be turned on or off. I prefer open captions myself, but those options are available. The accessibility benefits are for those with impaired hearing. Descriptive captions aid those, of course, with visual impairment. And it also assists people with neurological or learning disabilities, where they have the option to consume content either visually or through oral. It's really up to, I think all of the accessibility options really are providing every individual an option to consume information in the way that they prefer. And so whether you have these disabilities or not, it's great. If you're in a noisy or quiet environment, you can choose how you're going to consume your media. And it also improves the ranking on your website and your social posts if you're making all of these additional conduits available for communication. In video, you should always use captions and ensure that what is said is relayed accurately, and ensure that you take the time to look at it. Like auto captioning is a great function, but you can also do your own captioning depending on the importance of the piece that you're doing. It's important that if you're doing captioning, to think about it from the beginning of your process. It can kind of change how your production goes if you know right at the beginning that captions are an essential part of the final product. So moving on to some general communication pointers. There's a lot of references to plain language in not just web writing, but writing in general. And what does that really mean? Really, basically, it's about communicating so that your audience understands you quickly and easily. So in order to know whether your audience is going to connect with your content, you really need to understand who it is that you're talking to, because what's clear to one audience group may not be clear to another. So it's really important to kind of start with who is it that you're talking to and what is it that they're supposed to be getting out of your content. What do they need? Is it easy to scan the information to locate, the essential piece of information? There's sort of a transactional component to, especially when it comes to goods and services, which are the most essential part of the accessibility piece, is people need to be able to do business with you. So if they can scan it and understand and readily access the piece that they're looking for, it makes your audiences a lot more happy. Meets their needs better. Next screen. So some common tips is to have a reader-centered organization of information. And that was what Suzanne was talking about earlier, is to organize things according to importance or what's most critical at the top. Often, especially in academic worlds and sort of depending on what your organization what kind of content you generally are communicating about, whether it's engineering or legal matters. It can be really hard to do things in a plain language way without losing meaning. And it can feel uncomfortable sometimes to say you and or to make things more personal, depending on what that content is. But this is an important component of plain language, because that's how people talk. That's how people understand each other. Using active voice, try to keep your paragraphs short, 2 or 3 short sentences per paragraph. We actually strive to replace longer words and more rare words with common everyday language. Use easy to follow design features. If you've got a list of 3 or more things, make it a bullet point. Make sure that you're using headers and subheaders that have meaning, that show the progression of ideas, and use supporting visuals that help either focus on what's important or conveys meaning, and make sure that you've got the descriptors that help the readers as well. A lot of organizations aim for grade 9 or 10 reading level. You can use the readability test or Fleisch-Kincaid in your MS Word doc. There's different readability and also plain language readers that you can access online. And again, it's not just about accessibility. It's when you really think about the people who are accessing your information, they want to get it easily and quickly. And often embellishment words don't change the meaning. And maybe that nuance is important to 1 or 2 people, but is it really important to have fine nuance for the person who's consuming the information? So doing that audit and looking again at your content to make sure that it's plainly, transacting meaning. That's what I keep coming back to. And it's amazing how you can take really long, complicated copy and make it quite simple and meaningful. Next slide. So I know a lot of organizations have guidelines. They use CP or MLA or whatever style guides. But when it comes to plain language, there are additional recommendations. Using $ and percent rather than writing out %. They stand out and they're easier to scan and read. Using 2 billion and not all the zeros. Reducing punctuation, trying not to use commas, colons, and semicolons. Like all of those things actually create more visual clutter, and it can be easier to just push things into a list, create a list, rather than having it all together in a single sentence. Try to front load your sentences with the most important piece at the front. Make sure you've got lots of white space. Use bullet point whenever you can. Create readable chunks. And use bold and color at times to emphasize, rather than using the underline, which we reserve for links only. Here's an example of a before and after about emergency management. And like if you were reading, essential information about disaster management, what would you want to read? The one on the left or the one on the right? So when you think about the content, when you scan through your website, do you have big chunks of content that's really, when you look at it, if you pretend that you have fresh eyes coming to the site, is it easy to read or is it dense? And what can you do to help make it more effective? Here are some resources, and here's one style for how to write links in. So here I've used the office or the site as the main bullet point, and then I've done the hyperlink on the description instead of read this or link here. You can provide some descriptive. It's accessible social media and website content writing. So that's sort of a more descriptive link copy. And it's just, how can you create more meaning in the link when you're writing out links? The other thing that we've done is we've created a style guide for some websites because sometimes it's hard to determine what kind of link is it? Am I going to be opening a PDF, or am I going to be opening up a new web page, or am I going off site? So some design principles you can use is having a different icon for each different type, so that the user, especially in large complicated sites, can readily determine whether they want to click the link or not, depending on how they're consuming it on a tablet or a phone, where you don't necessarily want to open a PDF. So there's lots of great standardized ways that you can design and create great web interactions. And next. So in terms of your corporate guidelines, when you're thinking about communications, a lot of you folks probably have already seen there's brand guidelines where you've got logos and taglines, graphics and iconography. That's fantastic. What I often find is missing is a terms of reference or a style guide for communications. That it has a lot of customized pieces that are unique to your organization, words that don't normally get capitalized, you capitalize in your organization. There might be terminology and acronyms that your organization uses commonly that new people into the organization wouldn't be familiar with. So to standardize all of the terminology and when you use certain words, and then to pick a default. So if it's not addressed in this style guide, what are you defaulting to as a guideline for communicators in your organization? And then a third that I almost never see, but is so needed, is web and social style and usage guidelines. So this is really the place. And then you might have sort of a guideline for your staff to, if you're posting a work social post, what are the guidelines to use in terms of tone and hashtags and so forth. So here is where I would add in the accessibility guidelines to if your organization that wants to do alt tags that have diverse people that use particular terms that align to your mission, this is where you can make sure people are doing it correctly and in a way that's thoughtful for your audiences. You can include your hashtags that are standard for your organization. You can provide guidelines for photo selections and iconography that you do or do not want to use in your social media and web. And so it's really important to build out these guidelines and to evolve them. And so just the closing slide really is, how do you go from here to there, is to establish goals for how you're going to achieve the new standards, know who's responsible for leading or consulting, create a work back schedule, engage experts to consult. It's a great time to update your website because there's so many wonderful new tools and plugins that allow you to do fantastic things. Seek grants or funding to help support your accessibility features. And there's also green web standards that you might want to work towards. And I'm going to say it again, have deadlines, have a work back schedule, make sure you meet your deadlines. It's hard, it's challenging, there's lots of people to consult with. And if you need help, of course, ask us. We'd love to work with you. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, we'll open up the chat for questions. If you guys have questions, you guys can unmute as well. I have a question for you, Deborah. What's too many hashtags? There's always the question around hashtags, and some people say 5 to 6 hashtags, and some people will put 10 to 20. I personally like to just have 5 to 6 hashtags because it looks a bit more cleaner. But in your perspective, what do you think?
And I say this all the time, but it's true. It depends on the client. It depends on your objectives and what you're doing. But for most clients, for most typical scenarios, you're right. I think, you're at the lower end is still very effective. And so it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and how you're getting your message out. But yeah, I'm with keep it simple. And I don't, how enjoyable is it to be, sorting through a million hashtags. But I think what's important actually is that organizations thoughtfully choose the hashtags that they want to support where their folks are having conversations. So have the standard ones that that are relevant. And then it's nice to put in some extra effort and find new hashtags where you can spread your message farther.
Awesome. Do we have a question, guys? You guys can put in the chat.
I'm curious if anybody has an accessibility guide that they're already using. Has anyone started the process of updating and addressing all of the accessibility features?
How would that look like, Deborah? Like, I'm not too familiar with that.
Well, you do, like, even with previous requirements by the province, you do have to have on your website information about physical. So the physical space accessibility has already been implemented. That deadline has come and gone. So public organizations need to have physical accessibility for their buildings with emergency plans and safety, and there has to be some kind of method for people to contact the organization if they don't find it. So the communications piece that we were talking about today is really part of a much larger plan for accessibility. So I guess I wonder whether folks are finding, yeah, we have existing teams, committees, documents that are guiding our physical accessibility, and this will just slot really nicely into our existing plans.
Okay. Is that mandatory?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was working at the Manitoba Museum, they implemented the physical and a kind of a complaints process to be able to address where you're not accessible. And so it has to be on your website. You need to have a document, and you need to have a clear communication link for folks to be able to engage with your organization.
Thank you. Do you have any question, guys?
Sorry, I have a question. So you said some exceptions for webinars, for websites were technology not available or technology not feasible, and the undue hardship. Does that mean that it's too expensive, I can't do it? Is that a viable excuse?
It could be. It could be. And I mean, I think you have to have, is it 2 paid employees? There is a minimum sort of, yeah.
Okay.
So if you're a one-person startup, these rules don't all apply to you.
Okay.
And so, but as you grow, you have to make sure that you've got sort of a checkbox that you're addressing the things as you grow. And there's a certain kinds of web experiences that cannot be easily translated into, like, it sort of depends what you're selling or showing.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can make a case for it.
Okay, and then you also had mentioned that there were some additional exceptions for non-for-profits. Do you happen to know what those are?
You know, it's on the accessibility office. I don't know if you know, Suzanne, but I think it's very similar to what was described. You just
Okay.
they want to make it open that, like, if you have a particular situation where it's just not feasible, then make your case for why it's not feasible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I just inserted in the chat some upcoming webinars and events. So this week on June 13th, we have Navigating Your Privacy Obligation as a Business. That will be presented by Kendall from TDS Law. And then on Thursday, June 20th, we have Doing Business in the USA for Manitoba Companies, presented by Reese, Jessica, Desire, Andy from MLT Aikens. And then on Wednesday, June 26th, we have our WTC talk featuring siblings Adrien Dandeneau and Christian Dandeneau. So check those out. Again, thank you, Deborah and Susan, for this great presentation. And I hope that everybody have a good rest of their day.